It started like any other quiet Saturday morning in our suburban neighborhood. Birds chirping, sun filtering through the blinds, the smell of fresh coffee filling my kitchen. I had just settled into my chair with the newspaper when I heard a knock at the door. Not a gentle one. It was sharp, aggressive, like someone wanted to start a fight, not a conversation. I opened the door and found myself face to face with a man I knew too well. Cliff, the new head of the Homeowners Association. He had that usual sneer on his face, clipboard in one hand, his other resting on his belt like he was the sheriff of a Wild West town. Cliff had only been in the neighborhood for 6 months, but he acted like he built the entire street with his bare hands. His favorite pastime was picking fights over mailboxes being half an inch too short, grass being slightly too long, or cars parked 2 feet off the driveway. I tried to keep it calm. "Morning, Cliff." He didn't even return the greeting, just jabbed his clipboard in my direction and said, "You've got 24 hours to remove that shed in your backyard. It violates Section 14B of the HOA bylaws. You were warned." That shed had been there for over 5 years. It wasn't new. It wasn't offensive. It matched the house, was clean, and barely visible from the street. Plus, I had received written approval from the previous HOA president. But I knew better than to argue logic with Cliff. "I've already got approval for that," I said, motioning toward the living room where my file cabinet held the signed documents. He smirked. "Well, I'm the HOA now, and my approval's the only one that matters." That's when I realized it wasn't about the shed. It never was. Cliff had a power trip. He loved having control over others. And I knew men like him. I dealt with them before in much higher stakes environments, but I didn't say anything. "Not yet." I calmly asked, "Is this your final notice?" "Next visit," he said with a smile, "comes with a fine. And if you resist, we escalate. Rules are rules." I watched as he turned and walked back to his little HOA-branded SUV, parked just outside my driveway like he was patrolling the border. I closed the door and let out a long breath. It was always something with him, but this time felt different, more aggressive. The next day, sure enough, he was back. But this time, I wasn't home. My wife, Karen, answered the door. She later told me he was louder, angrier, and made her feel uneasy. He didn't just mention the shed, he brought up the backyard fence, our mailbox paint, even a garden gnome my daughter had placed by the steps. He was digging, trying to find anything to justify his authority. When I got back, she was visibly shaken. That didn't sit right with me. I went out back, checked the shed, walked the perimeter, took photos of everything just in case. I even printed out the HOA approvals I had from the last 3 years. But I wasn't planning on going to war. Not yet. A few days passed. Then it escalated. It was Thursday afternoon. I was mowing the lawn when I saw Cliff walking down the sidewalk. Again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He had another guy with him. Big, bald, arms crossed, clearly trying to look intimidating. They stopped at my driveway. I shut the mower and walked over, wiping my forehead. Cliff didn't even say hello. "This is your last warning. We're issuing a fine of $500, effective immediately." I looked at the paper he handed me. No letterhead, no signature, just a printed document from some template he clearly made himself. "I'm not paying that," I said flatly. "You don't have the authority." The bald guy stepped forward. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, pal." That's when my instincts kicked in. I knew a bluff when I saw one. This wasn't official HOA business. Cliff was trying to strong-arm me, using intimidation. I said nothing, just turned and walked back into my house. I wasn't about to create a scene. Not yet, but I started preparing. Check the neighborhood cameras. Not just mine, but I had access to several others, quietly installed by neighbors who were tired of petty thefts and strange activity at night. I reviewed the footage, and sure enough, I found something interesting. The night before, Cliff had walked into my backyard without permission, flashlight in hand, snooping around the shed. He even took pictures. Trespassing. Now I had something. Made a few calls, not to a lawyer, not yet, but to someone else, an old colleague from the agency. I told him what was happening, in vague terms. He laughed. "You've got the patience of a saint," he said. I would have pulled the badge day one, but I wasn't ready to blow my cover. Not yet. See, Cliff had no idea about my past. None of the neighbors did. As far as they knew, I was just a retired government analyst. No one asked questions, and I didn't give answers. But the truth? I had spent over 2 decades working in Homeland Security, field intelligence, threat assessment, counter ops. I'd been in real confrontations, life and death ones. This little HOA bully wasn't going to scare me. The next confrontation came. Sooner than expected. Saturday evening. Karen and I were having dinner on the back patio. Our daughter was playing with the dog on the grass. It was peaceful. Then we heard yelling. Cliff was in the alley behind the fence, shouting, "Come out here. You think you can ignore the HOA?" I stood slowly and walked to the side gate. He was pacing behind the fence like a man possessed. His face was red, hands clenched. And then it happened. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a small black pistol, held it, low but visible. Karen gasped. I opened the gate and stepped forward, slowly, calmly. Inside, every trained instinct I had was alert. "Put the gun away, Cliff," I said in a measured voice. "You're way out of line." He raised his voice. I said, "This is your final warning. Remove the shed now, or I'll call in enforcement." "You mean the HOA board?" I said, keeping my eyes on the gun. "Or your bald friend from down the street?" He looked stunned for a second. The mention of his friend caught him off guard. He hadn't expected that. And then, very slowly, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet, opened it, turned it toward him. His eyes locked onto the badge. It was official. "Homeland Security," I said. "You just pulled a weapon on a federal officer." He froze, mouth slightly open. His hand trembled. "You need to leave," I continued. "Right now. And if I ever see you step foot on my property again, I won't be showing you a badge next time." He didn't say another word. He turned, stumbled a bit, and walked off, quickly disappearing into the alley. Karen stood behind me, speechless. Our daughter had gone back inside, thankfully not seeing the gun. I stood there for a while, breathing slowly, adrenaline still pulsing. It was over. For now, but I knew Cliff wouldn't go quietly. Not men like him, and I wasn't done either. I didn't flinch. I had been trained not to. His hand shook slightly as he gripped the pistol, and I could see the fear behind his aggression. I raised both hands slowly, not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to give him any excuse. My voice was calm, steady, almost too calm for a situation like this. "You really want to think about what you're doing," I said. His eyes darted, as if trying to judge whether I was bluffing or not. He wasn't dealing with the scared homeowner. He was dealing with someone who had seen combat zones, who had worked in the dark corners of national security, who had stopped people much more dangerous than him. It was clear he wasn't expecting resistance. Most people in the neighborhood would have panicked, would have begged or argued or backed away. But I stood my ground. I knew how these situations worked. The moment you show fear, you lose control. So I kept my voice low, commanding, and didn't break eye contact. He tried to reassert himself, pointing to the folder he had thrown on the ground earlier. "You violated several HOA regulations," he barked. "The flag in your yard, the camera on your mailbox, your dog off leash, all violations." I glanced at the folder on the ground, but didn't move. "That still doesn't justify you pulling a weapon on private property," I replied. "And you know it." He was breathing hard now. The weight of his own mistake was beginning to settle in. I could tell this wasn't a man used to being challenged. He was used to intimidating people into compliance. And maybe that had worked for years, but it wasn't going to work today. Because I wasn't just some random neighbor. I was a federal agent, off duty but never off alert. Still, I didn't want this to escalate. I had no interest in drawing attention, in blowing my cover, or getting law enforcement involved in a way that complicated things. So I asked one last time, "Lower the weapon, walk away." We forget this happened, but instead of backing down, he did something worse. He clicked off the safety. That's when instinct kicked in. In one swift motion, I shifted to my left, grabbed his wrist, and forced the gun upward. A shot rang out, missing me by inches and slicing through the air. Like a whip, I twisted his arm behind his back, disarmed him, and pushed him against the fence. He was gasping, shocked, humiliated, pinned like a criminal in his own HOA polo. "You're lucky I didn't break your arm," I muttered as I pocketed the weapon. "Now, you listen carefully. You show up on my property again with a weapon, I won't be this gentle." He struggled under my grip, but I could feel his energy shift from arrogant to desperate. "You don't know who I am," he hissed. "I run this community." That made me laugh. Actually laugh. "You think I care about your little clipboard kingdom? I've handled people who've tried to blow up cities. You think your title scares me?" I let go and he stumbled forward, nearly falling over the garden gnome my neighbor's kid had left near the sidewalk. He turned around, red-faced, sputtering something about calling the police. "Do it," I told him. "Call them. I'll explain to them how you pulled a gun on a federal agent on his own property. You won't just lose your job, you'll lose everything." His eyes widened then. The pieces were starting to fit. The way I moved, the calm voice, the quick disarm. He looked at me differently now. Not like a neighbor, like a threat. He didn't call the police. He turned and walked away, his posture broken, his ego shattered. I watched him go, then checked my perimeter out of habit. Everything seemed normal again, but I knew this wasn't over. Men like him don't take humiliation lightly. They scheme, they wait. But I was prepared for that too. That night, I sat in my living room, dog curled at my feet, reviewing the footage from my security camera. The entire confrontation had been recorded. The moment he pulled the gun, the disarm, everything. I copied the footage to a drive and put it in a secure spot, just in case. Because deep down, knew this wasn't just about an HOA dispute anymore. This had become personal. He would come back, and when he did, I had to be ready. 2 days later, an anonymous complaint was filed to Homeland Security about my suspicious activities and military-grade surveillance equipment. Classic move. Try to beat me with the system I worked for. But the thing is, I still had contacts, people who knew me, trusted me, respected my work. The complaint was flagged as a possible retaliation case and quietly dismissed. But that wasn't all. My dog, Max, a retired, bomb-sniffing canine, was suddenly targeted by new HOA rules. They updated the policy to say that only non-working pets were allowed off-leash, even in fenced yards. A direct hit. Max was highly trained, disciplined, and more loyal than any human I knew. They were trying to erase everything about him from the community. That's when I made a decision. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one, not with fists or firearms, but with exposure. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every letter, every interaction. And then I reached out to a few journalist friends, some retired, some still active, and I told them the story, not the federal agent part, but the truth about what was happening in this perfect little neighborhood. About the man who tried to use power to silence others. About how fear was used to control. They were interested. The story was local, but it echoed a larger truth that sometimes the most dangerous threats don't wear uniforms. They wear badges of authority in places no one expects. The article ran quietly in a small online investigative blog. No names, no faces, just facts. But it spread. The HOA officer's behavior became the talk of the neighborhood. People began asking questions. Homeowners who had once been quiet suddenly remembered their own encounters with him, the bullying, the threats, the sudden fines. A movement began, quietly at first, and then louder. A petition to remove him from his position started circulating, and I wasn't the one leading it. The people were. Meanwhile, continued living my life. Max and I took our morning walks. Same route, same pace. People who once avoided us now waved. Kids came to pet him. Someone even left a small thank you card in my mailbox, unsigned, but heartfelt. I realized something then. Max hadn't just been my companion. He had become a quiet symbol of resilience, of strength, of dignity. But I wasn't naive. I knew the HOA officer wasn't done yet. Men like him don't go down easy. He would make one last move, something bold, reckless. And when he did, I'd be waiting. Because he still had no idea who I really was. and he was about to find out. I sat quietly in my kitchen, sipping my black coffee, staring at the blinds. Ever since the HOA officer had drawn his weapon, the neighborhood hadn't felt the same. The trust had been severed. The casual waves from neighbors now came with cautious glances. People sensed something had shifted even if they didn't know exactly what had happened. I wasn't shaken by the gun. What shook me was the arrogance, the audacity of someone in a civilian role, thinking they could use force as if they were above the law. I had seen things, been in places where real threats existed, and that man was no threat. He was a loose cannon pretending to be in control. Later that day, I got a knock on my door. It was Dennis, my neighbor from across the street, the one who rarely spoke, but always watched. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. I opened the door. "Sure, everything all right?" He stepped inside, looked around cautiously, and whispered, "I heard what happened. He pulled a gun on you?" I nodded. "He did." Dennis looked down, hesitated, and then said, "He did the same to my wife last year, over a garden gnome. Threatened to fine her, then reached behind his jacket. She was terrified." I stared at eyebrows raised. "Did you report it?" He shook his head. "To who? The HOA president? They're all in on it. The guy's been untouchable for years." That made my jaw tighten. "No one is untouchable." Dennis leaned in. "You planning something?" I paused. "Let's just say, I've filed the right reports. Now, it's about patience." In the following days, I started compiling evidence. Emails, audio clips from concerned residents, security footage from cameras in driveways. There was enough to build a case, not just against the HOA officer, but the entire corrupt board. Every day brought a new piece of the puzzle. One lady said she was forced to repaint her home twice in the same year or face $500 a day fines. Another couple admitted they were bullied into selling their home under market value. And all of it tied back to the same few names, officers with no oversight, running the neighborhood like a personal kingdom. I visited the city records office and dug deeper. What I found was darker than expected. Shell companies were buying properties foreclosed by the HOA. And guess who was listed as a silent partner in most? The officer himself, James Buckley. At this point, I no longer viewed him as a nuisance. He was a predator, and predators, when exposed to daylight, always run. One evening, I sat at the edge of the community park, where parents played with kids and teens skated along the sidewalk. From my bench, I watched Buckley. He was patrolling, as usual, walking the sidewalks like he owned them. But this time, he stopped at my bench. "Agent or not," he muttered, "this is my turf." I looked up slowly. "Not for long," he smirked. "You think your badge scares me? I've got more power than you in this neighborhood." I chuckled. "James, you don't even have power over your own shadow. You just haven't realized it yet." He leaned in. "You're playing with fire." I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't play. I finish things." 2 nights later, the operation went into motion. I wasn't alone anymore. I had quietly involved internal affairs. The Homeland Security office knew everything, and they were interested, not just because of a power-abusing HOA officer, but because money laundering was involved. We staged the sting at the next HOA board meeting, held monthly. These meetings were always closed door, but this time, I had authorization to attend and record everything. I walked into that clubhouse wearing a wire, a hidden camera tucked behind my collar, and a calm demeanor that masked the storm brewing beneath. The board sat around their long table, James Buckley at the head, sipping from a metal flask like he always did. "You don't belong here," he said, not even looking up. "I have questions about your management of foreclosure proceedings," I said, "and your involvement in the LLCs buying them." The room fell quiet. For the first time, Buckley's cocky grin faded. "Excuse me?" he snapped. I said. I continued. "I want to know why multiple homes are being bought by shell companies you're affiliated with, and resold at profits while original owners were bullied to leave." Another board member, Karen Morse, interjected nervously. "This is not the place for accusations." I leaned in calmly. "You're right, but the court is, and we're going there next." At that moment, the door opened. Two Homeland agents stepped inside. Their presence sent a wave of confusion across the room. Buckley stood up, looking pale. "What is this?" he barked. Agent Silva stepped forward. "James Buckley, you are under investigation for financial fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit unlawful foreclosure. We're seizing all HOA records effective immediately." The room erupted in gasps. Papers shuffled. Karen dropped her coffee. Buckley's hands trembled. I'm on a neighborhood board, not a criminal," he stammered. I stood and looked at him. "You pulled a gun on me. You threatened a dozen residents. You used your role to scare, silence, and steal. That makes you worse than a criminal. It makes you a coward." The agents cuffed him right there in front of everyone. A moment of perfect, poetic justice. As they led him out, his eyes met mine. But this time, no smirk. Just fear. Real fear. That week, the board was dismantled. A temporary committee was formed. With real transparency, neighbors came out of their shells, finally unafraid to talk, to decorate their homes, to speak up. Dennis came over one morning with coffee and said, "You turned this place around." I smiled. "We did. It just took someone standing up to a bully," he nodded, "and someone with the training to do it right." But it wasn't just about the training. It was about knowing that injustice, no matter how small, rots everything it touches. And if left unchecked, it grows into something uglier. This neighborhood wasn't just a place where I lived. It became a place where I made a stand. And now, every time I walk my dog past the clubhouse where the corruption once said, I know, this turf is finally ours again. He kept walking backward, gun still raised, trying to maintain control over the situation he no longer understood. His voice cracked now, demanding again that I stay down, that I stop moving, but I wasn't even advancing. I was just standing, calm, in control. I think that's what unnerved him most. He expected panic. He expected fear. What he got was measured, deliberate silence. And just as his panic began to spiral into something dangerous, a voice thundered from the right. "Drop the weapon now." It was Ramirez, my backup badge out, service weapon drawn, walking in a wide arc to flank the man. Two more agents followed, surrounding him in a smooth triangle. "Drop it." Last warning. The HOA officer turned, confused, eyes darting between each of us. I stepped forward, slowly raised my hand, and pulled my wallet from my back pocket. I flipped it open to reveal my credentials. Homeland Security. "You just pulled a weapon on a federal agent." His face drained of color. He stammered something incoherent, then finally let the gun slip from his hand. It hit the ground with a clatter, the sound somehow louder than everything else around us. Ramirez moved in and cuffed him, reading him his rights, while I stepped back and finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was whole. Others were gathering now, peeking out from behind fences, some with their phones up, most just shocked. A couple of them recognized me. I could see it in their eyes. Mr. Nelson, from 2 houses down, whispered to his wife and pointed. And then, the murmur spread, not just about the HOA guy getting arrested, but about who I really was. For months, they thought I was just the quiet guy who walked his dog early, kept his lawn neat, and never caused trouble. No one suspected the layers beneath. After the HOA officer was in custody and driven off, I sat down on the curb, petting Max, who had somehow remained the calmest out of all of us. Ramirez came over and sat beside me, handing me a bottle of water. "You good?" "Yeah," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "I didn't want it to go that far." "He made it go that far," she said. "You kept your cool." That night, everything changed. Word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Not just that the HOA president had been arrested, but that I was undercover federal law enforcement. Some folks looked at me with awe, others with caution. A few came over to thank me. One neighbor, Mrs. Combs, who always brought over banana bread at Christmas, said she always knew there was something special about me. Max, of course, became a hero. People stopped us on our morning walks. Kids wanted to pet him. Someone even made little stickers that said, "Max for HOA President." They were on lampposts, mailboxes. He was no longer the dog someone tried to ban. He was the mascot of the whole block, Within 2 weeks, the HOA board held an emergency election. Turns out, our disgraced former president had been embezzling HOA funds for over a year. The gun incident just opened the door to everything. There were dozens of complaints about him over the past few months, all ignored, all brushed off. But after what happened with me, people came forward with stories, threats, fines, harassment. The new board, made up of actual neighbors who cared, voted to repeal the ridiculous pet restrictions, refunded several fines, and even hosted a neighborhood BBQ, and asked me to be the guest of honor. I declined. I wasn't in this for attention, but I did show up, quietly, with Max. They had a dog station set up with treats, water, and a big sign that said, "Mask at Max's Corner." Max walked around like he owned the place. He had earned it. One guy came up to me, holding a burger in one hand, drink in the other. "You know," he said, "I used to think you were just another guy trying to avoid community stuff. But now, I get it. You were protecting more than your dog. You were protecting us." I didn't say much, just nodded, but deep down I knew he was right. Sometimes, the line between keeping a low profile and standing up for what's right gets blurry. But when someone crosses it, especially with threats and force, you have to draw your own. Weeks passed. The neighborhood settled into a calmer rhythm. The tension that once hung in the air was gone, and I felt, for the first time, like I wasn't just living among strangers. I was part of a community that had seen the truth and grown stronger because of it. One morning, I stepped outside with Max, coffee in hand, leash in the other. A group of kids was riding bikes past the driveway. One of them shouted, "Hi, Mr. M." "Hi, Max." "Morning," I called back, and Max gave a friendly bark. Across the street, a new couple was moving in. They waved. I waved back, and for a moment, I stood there, just soaking it in. Peace. Hard-earned, but worth every step. Sometimes, it takes chaos to bring clarity. A gun drawn, a badge revealed, a secret uncovered. But in the end, the message was clear. You mess with my dog, you mess with the wrong guy.